Welcome friends to another r/prorevenge video. If you want to join me in getting revenge against the YouTube algorithm, make sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons down below. That said, our first story of the day is by Spodson. If you're going to try your hand at extortion, be smarter than the ex-cops you're trying it on. Full disclosure, this isn't my story but my father's, and as he's a complete Luddite, he wanted me to put this up as it's one of his favorite stories. To start with, my family owns a construction company. We develop tracks and build nice homes for low-income families. But anyone in construction knows that there's some great people who work construction and some that are pretty shifty. So one day, my father was in his office when one of the secretaries came in and told him there was a really strange call for him. He answers and is immediately told by the voice on the other end of the line that if he doesn't pay $50,000 to him, the voice would tell authorities there were 4 dead bodies hidden in the track's trenches. So a couple of things. My dad is ex-law enforcement, so is his brother, our site foreman. Both are even-tempered but shrewd men. So my father, who smells BS right where it falls, calmly says, "We'll have to call you back," and hangs up the phone. He then pulls out a tape recorder from his desk and calls both our secretary and accountant in with pens and notepads. The phone rings and my dad puts it on speaker. As the guy threatens my father to never hang up on him again, my father hits record and mimes writing so the staff will transcribe everything this guy says. Over the course of the conversation, the voice lays everything out: the amount, the drop-off point, and the proof the bodies weren't there. My father tells him to call back in an hour as the money will take some time to get. The voice agrees and hangs up. Then my father calls the police. He plays the tape for them, shows them the matching transcripts, and tells the cops the time and place for the pickup. Cops apparently have better things to do, so they blow it off as a prank. This doesn't sit well with my father, so he calls up my uncle, and the two of them get to work. After the hour's up, the call comes in. My father has a pretty good idea of who it is making the calls. It's a backhoe operator that we had a pretty good working relationship with. So my father just addresses him by his name. We'll call him Donnie. So he tells Donnie there's been a snag and that they need to meet in 10 minutes in the parking lot near his office. You know, someplace public. Donnie agrees. So my father and uncle, both with concealed carry permits, grab their pistols and head out. I got to hear what happened next because my father brought the tape recorder to ensure they could clear their names when the jerk who picked up the money inevitably said they were innocent. The tape was hilarious. A voice says, "You OP?" Dad says, "Yeah. How do you know Donnie?" They say, "You know, a friend of a friend of a friend." Uncle says, "So you know you're an accomplice in a felony, right?" The voice says, "Whatever, where's the package?" Dad says, "Uncle of OP, move in." At this point, my uncle, who's the better shot, draws his gun. The voice yells, "Freaking crap!" Car turns on, and this was a really bad move as when the car is running, it's considered a deadly weapon. Uncle yells, "Get him!" Sounds of a scuffle followed by swearing and the honking of the car's horn as my father bounces the guy's head 3 times off the steering wheel. They then made a bunch of statements as they drug him out. Basically, "We aren't law enforcement, we don't have a warrant, we're holding you under citizen's arrest." Everything they need to make the arrest legal. So my father and uncle bring this bloodied poop heel into the police station in cuffs. My uncle still had us from his time on the job. The cops are gobsmacked but listen to the recording and decide to do their job. My father points out that Donnie is still out there, but again, the cops have an easy slam dunk in this guy, so they don't really want to go out again. Fine, but once again, this didn't sit well with my father. So the next day, he and my uncle go for a little drive. It turns out Donnie lived 45 minutes away from the drop site, and my father was 100% sure Donnie wouldn't trust his partner in crime with $50,000. So they figured he was nearby. Sure enough, after driving by the parking lots of all the hotels in a 5-mile radius, they find Donnie's truck. They go in and pay the desk guy $100 to tell them which room he was in, then call the cops and update them, then ask if they're going to come out and get him, or should they just bring him in like they did yesterday. This time, the police decide to come out. After everything was said and done, Donnie admitted to everything up to and including the Lindbergh kidnapping. He spent some time in prison. My father and uncle still relish this story, and will to this day chuckle when they remember bouncing that guy's head off the steering wheel. Let's say somebody you know makes threats about you or your property, and them escalating it to the police could eventually cost you thousands of dollars in property damage searching for where the bodies are. If you're under that kind of pressure, would you be the one to want to go kind of rogue like this? Maybe try and hire a private investigator or something. Maybe go down to the station and petition and file a report or whatever you can. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Our next story is by Student Hi-Fi. Bully me and made my senior year like heck? Say goodbye to your scholarships. For context, I'm Asian. Most of these things I mentioned happened after school reopened. I spent my high school years in a public high school in one of the best neighborhoods in SoCal, and we only had a handful of black kids in the entire school. They somehow are the worst people I've ever encountered in my entire life. They would follow me around, yell racial slurs at me, they poured water into my locker with a funnel, and I have to pay almost $1,000 back to the school due to damaged books. I walked back home for most of the time, and they would follow me in their car and threaten to run me over. So later I got a bike, but one of the kids stole it and showed off to the other kids in my school. The worst part is the schools and teacher allowed them to do this because they didn't want to be called racist and they need them for diversity quota blah blah blah, so they can't do anything. Plus some of them have scholarships negotiated, all ruin their lives, and the school even wants me to apologize to them. I also created an Asian student union and sold boba to get around $400 so we can go on a field trip together, but the school reallocated the money and created a black student union instead. This one really stings. I finally had enough around February this year, and I called the police instead of telling the school when they stole my bike. They were swiftly arrested while still having my bike strapped on their car. They're charged with grand theft, with other people also reporting them to the police. One of the kids sued them for assault because they dumped him into a dumpster. 2 of them land with a felony, and 3 landed with misdemeanor charges. They're all over 18. The lead culprit had a full-ride football scholarship at a state university, and another bully had a $50,000 a year cross-country scholarship as well. Scholarships are all retracted because of their criminal records. Writing this because my high school counselor called me this morning, asking me if I can sleep, knowing that I ruined a future football star. So, while I do think there's some pretty disingenuous generalization going on in OP's story here, the underlying problem is everybody was willing to overlook all of these issues these people were doing because they're the football star, because they help meet certain quotas. It's disappointing that when it helps further the academics of the school or fulfills some other selfish reason, they're willing to overlook people who are bullying each other and really causing some stress emotionally, physically, financially in these kids' lives that is also happening during one of the most developmental parts of their lives. Our next story is by the Drumming Ape. Make a fake call about your baby being locked in your car with the keys? Now your car's locked with the keys inside again. Circa 2001, I was a AAA tow truck driver and was working an overnight shift on a Friday. I received a call around 10 p.m. for a baby locked in a car with the keys inside. AAA policy is to attend these types of lockout emergency calls before any other calls that may be waiting. I sped down the highway as fast as my truck could take me and reached the location, which was a local mall. I found the car that was parked in a far corner of the parking lot alongside another car. There were about a half a dozen people hanging around. I jump out the truck, identified the owner, and asked him if this was his vehicle. "Yep, sure is." I say, "Okay, great, let me see what I can do." As I tried to peer into the windows, which were heavily tinted, I saw a glow coming from the stereo and could somewhat make out a blanket in the back seat, but the tint was so dark it was really tough to make out anything else. I ask, "The child's in the back seat?" They say, "Yeah, he's asleep." It took me about a minute to open the passenger's front door. As soon as the locking mechanism clicked, the owner of the vehicle reached in front of me, opened the door, and reached inside to grab his keys off the passenger seat and a 6-pack of beer off the floor. He stepped back and let out a little smart butt chuckle. I poked my head inside the car and looked into the back seat. There was no baby. The driver was still standing close to me and was in the process of twisting off the bottle cap to his beer while holding the keys in the same hand. Instinctively, I snatched his keys away from him, tossed them back into the car, pushed the lock button on his door frame and slammed it shut. "Go freak yourself. Now you can stay here all night," I said as I walked away and got back in my truck. No one said a word to me, and the driver stood there dumbfounded, holding his beer to his chest as I drove away. I called dispatch and explained what happened, and they made a note not to send any other drivers out to this account for a lockout situation. Congratulations, OP, you saved an alcoholic and his baby a 6-pack. Our next story is by Sell at Insure. Shoe company loses much more than my business. Several years ago, I bought a pair of shoes from a retailer that was primarily online. Once I received my shoes, I wore them around my house to try them out. They weren't comfortable, so I returned them. Apparently, that use created a micro bend in the leather, which made their appearance slightly less than brand new. They told me they were refusing to refund my money for the shoes. I went back and forth with them for a few days, and they kept refusing to refund my money, but did offer to mail me back the shoes I couldn't wear because they were poor quality and hurt my feet. Eventually, I contacted PayPal, provided my tracking number for the return, and my money was returned. Here's the fun part. While going through this drama, I discussed the situation with one of my good friends. About a month after this incident, she texted me a picture of a shoebox and asks, "Is this the brand that wouldn't refund your return?" I answer in the affirmative, to which she replies, "You tell them your friend works at the second biggest REI in the country, where footwear is the top selling department, and I'm telling every customer I see not to buy their shoes." I didn't end up telling them anything, but their brand is no longer carried at our local REI. Should have just given me my darn refund. I wonder how much this wound up costing them. Well, I know one thing, you don't want to piss off people or the family of the people that sign your paychecks, especially by doing something in bad taste such as not accepting returns. I understand shoe condition is a pretty fickle thing actually, but one use around the house and it's unreturnable feels kinda shady. And our final story of the day is by an anonymous poster. Building manager accused us of things we didn't do. Now he'll face the force of telemarketing forever. So one detail for context first. Where I lived, all residential buildings have a manager that is somebody that lives there and is legally responsible for maintenance, rules, managing money, and anything in the best interest of the tenants' well-being in general. Also, we were four 24-year-olds that worked at finance. We went to college together and worked at the same company. Basically 10 to 12 hours a day and came back home late after a happy hour almost every day. My friends and I were living together for a while. We were 3 guys and 1 girl. The owner of the place where we used to live decided to sell, so we had to find a new place and move to the building right across the street. Very convenient. But 1 week after we moved in, a bunch of issues started to appear. The water pipes of one of the bathrooms exploded, and the landlord took weeks to fix it. We had to go shower at the gym, never been to the gym as often again, and the building manager gave us a hard time like it was our fault and said he would fine us for the building damage. For some reason, every time he spoke with us, it felt like he was parenting us and would get us grounded. But as I said, we were kids, but we worked our butts off and paid our own bills. We started to get targeted for everything. One day he showed up saying we were throwing water out of the window, only to see that the water was falling from above us. But we got a hard time anyways. Other times, somebody was throwing trash and we got accused again. Other times, we had a noise complaint when we were out of town. We never took it seriously and just moved on, but COVID hit and we were confined for months. We were losing our minds, so every day we would play games and get drunk together, and our neighbor said one day to keep the volume down a bit. But no worries. She knew we were good and said she'd text us if we made too much noise. We even gave her a cake to show her that we wanted peace too. Months later, we're moving again. I got married and was moving abroad. Life was happening to us all, and we would be separate for the first time in years. 1 month left, we were drinking in the living room around 3 a.m. and we were talking loud, but if you were inside the next room, the volume was more than fine. The manager knocked on the door angry and said he would fine us, and he had no choice because the neighbor was complaining. That which we gave her a cake, and she never texted us asking to keep it down. Once we understood that the fine was coming anyways, we decided to make noise until at least 9 a.m. when we got too tired and drunk to go on. The next day, I see I have a missed call, and I call back to know who it was. Turns out the manager tried to call me that night. Too bad for him, now I have his number. So I send his number to a bunch of real estate websites, and once you're in their system, you get calls 3 times a day for the rest of your life. All I can really say is that even legal? I guess the bigger problem is, if it is illegal, you'd have to pay up to even try to challenge it. And is it worth it when you have to deal with maybe losing your living situation or getting a very tense living situation? Probably not, so I feel for those college kids, but it still sounds like they had their fun. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. So of all these stories I've read today, which is your favorite and why? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you haven't yet, if you could like and subscribe, that would mean a lot to me. Whatever you do, whether it's liking, subscribing, turning notifications on, all of it helps grow this channel, and I appreciate the heck out of it. So until next time, I'll see you all tomorrow with some more stories.